Hello, this is a video on how to rebuild a Pearson pump. So the Pearson pump is an energy recovery pump that's been developed by Spectra water makers for our RO systems, and I'm going to show you how to replace the seals. As you can see, I've already removed all the bolts already, for most of them anyway. So the short bolts go in the top and the bottom, and then these longer bolts go in the middle. Okay, and then there are two studs with nuts on them, and I put another bolt in here just so I can show you one thing. So you need very few tools to do this. You need a 6mm Allen wrench, a 13mm combination wrench, a small screwdriver that doesn't have any sharp edges on it, and I'll show you why about that later, and a 13mm socket. So, oh, and the most important thing is a small rubber band, which will become obvious in a moment. Okay, so one trick to know is that there's a nut on the back of these that sometimes will spin, so you may need to put a wrench on the back to take the nut off. So we'll just do that. Oop, there's the nut. So these are nuts with a flange on them, so they'll hold in your wrench. Makes it kind of nice. So that pops out. And there's a washer on each one. Okay, so now we'll take these guys out. So one thing to remember when you're taking this pump apart, and it's like anything with internal components that rub on each other, any kind of pump or motor, you want to be very clean. So you can see I've laid a towel down here on my workbench just to keep everything clean. So now we have all the bolts out, so now the first layer just comes off. This is the top of the valves, and I'll go through a little more detailed description of that as we start putting the pump back together. So this would be called layer 1. This is then layer 2. One of the things you want to do is inspect all of the surfaces. You can kind of see here where the valves are seating on this piece, and you want to be sure that there's no deep pits or any scoring in there. It's a little bit difficult to see in the video, but you basically just want to be sure this is a nice, clean, smooth surface. Okay, then this is called layer 3. So this is actually the cylinder, and you could just see the pistons are in here. There's also a little spring and piston right here that's a pressure equalizing valve that helps balance, a pressure balancing valve that helps balance the pressure between the input and the output side of the system. So there's a little spring that fits in this hole here, and that'll come out, and we'll just set that aside. And then this is where you can see how, I should have put this on before I took it apart, but you can put this on now. And what this does is it'll keep the valves from falling out. So it's a good idea to keep the valves all in the same hole, because they've kind of worn into place, and where they meet up with their corresponding valve heads, you want all these parts to stay in the same orientation. Okay, so that can go on there then. Okay, so now we've got it down to where the pistons are, so you want to remove these bolts, and these are all nylock nuts, so these will need to get unscrewed with a wrench, because you really can't do it with just your fingers, because the nylon kind of grabs the stud. So get them most all the way off. You can just take these off. And again, you'd like to keep these in the same orientation. So this will be piston 1, this is piston 2, this is piston 3, and the washers for those. Okay, so now we'll take off the next layer. And same thing, you can see where the valves are seating against this plate. You want to inspect this to make sure there's no leaks. You can see where there's a little bit of an indication of a leak in between here, but it wasn't too bad, so it probably was just while the O-rings were seating. So that can go back onto there. Okay, and then this is actually what we call layer 1. This is the first layer, so the layers count backwards from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I told you backwards to begin with. Okay. So that's that off. So now you can see these are the ceramics where all the seals rub. A little bit of discoloration is normal. What you want to do is we'll inspect all of these to see how everything looks underneath. So these are just a spacer, and we'll pull these out. So that's the spacer and the low pressure seal case. That's the spacer. That's for the next one. These are a little bit difficult to get out. Sometimes you need to pry them up a little bit with a screwdriver. In fact, I've got a bigger screwdriver here. This one. So a bigger screwdriver like that, and you can just take and pry that up. If my fingers were stronger, I'd be able to do that. So you can see how this one came out with both of the seal cases. That's pretty normal. So I will just set those aside, and then we'll deal with this one. Okay, so here, let me move this over to the side so you can see a little better. Okay, so this is just a spacer that holds the seal cases in place. This is the low pressure seal, and this is the high pressure seal. So the high pressure seal, we'll just pop this off. So this seal is just a standard lip seal that has an O-ring inside of it to help put more force on the lip. It's a pretty hard seal. You'll feel it. It doesn't feel rubbery, really. It's pretty hard. So what you want to do is put your screwdriver in between the case and the seal and just kind of wiggle it a little bit and push it in there, and you'll feel it start to get in between that groove there, and then just work your way around slowly, kind of twisting the screwdriver, and the seal will come right out. Okay, so that's pretty easy. So this is just a standard lip seal, normal thing that you would put into any kind of shaft seal on a pump or a motor. And with this one, you can actually just push in the replacement with your fingers. So you get it so that it's more or less lined up, and then you can just literally push it in with your thumbs. It's a pretty easy seal to replace. Doesn't require a press or anything. If you wanted to, you could always stick this in the jaws of a vise and squeeze it together, but it's really not that hard to push into place. This next one is the low pressure seal. And again, we can separate this from here. He says, well, let's see. Actually, you don't need to separate it, but in fact, we'll just leave it in there for now. So you can see there's another groove in here. It's the same kind of thing. This is a little bit different seal architecture, where this is actually a two-piece seal. So there's an O-ring around the outside, and then a hard plastic seal in the middle. So this seal goes together. It's basically two pieces again. So this is an O-ring, and this is the hard plastic seal. You just push these together like this. And then this is much easier to reassemble with a flat surface. So we'll actually utilize this plate as our flat surface. So if you just put this O-ring together like this and set it on the plate, and then orient the seal case over the top of it, and then just push it into place like that, it'll get started nice and evenly. And then to seat that seal all the way, you just take the high pressure seal case, locate it over the seal, and you can see how it's sticking up a little proud, and then we'll push it into place like that, and that's done. So that's really all there is to replacing these seals. Take each one out, do it like this, and then we'll just go back and reassemble it in reverse order. Okay, so, oh, there's one other thing to check in here. So there's inside this bore, there's a little rubber seal. It's just a flat rubber seal. When you pull it out, you'll see where the seal case has been pushing on it on one side and how it's nice and smooth on the other side. You know, put your finger in here, make sure there's no grit or debris, and then put this rubber seal back in the same way it came out. So it would be with the smooth side down, and the side that's been pushing against the seal case would be on the top. Okay, so we'll just put these all back into place. Now, one thing to note is there's a vent hole here. This is to allow water to leak out. When the seals fail, you'll see water dripping out of the case, and you want to orient these so they're vertical when the pump's installed, and I'll show you this again as we put it back together. So this is a complete seal case. Again, wipe the O-rings with your fingers, maybe put a little bit of silicone grease on this surface, make sure everything's lined up, and then push this back into place. Same thing with the last one. Okay, so there's all the seals put back into place, and it's really not any more difficult than that. It's a fairly simple thing to do. Again, you want to check and make sure the ceramics are all clean. These actually look like they're in really good shape. Other than that, I think we're good to go. So this is the assembly. It's all ready to go back on. You just better make sure that you get this oriented in the right way. So I left the pressure relief valve knob in. That goes up in this orientation. You're going to have to lift the pump up a little bit. You're probably going to do this with the pump actually still mounted on the machine, which is actually a little easier because the pump head just kind of floats out into space. So we'll push this guy back on. You can literally just push it on like that. You can grab the crankcase with your fingers and then just push this into place. You can see it slides on fairly easily. Okay, so this plate goes back on. So this is the, you can see how it's discolored a little bit, and then this D-shaped opening goes right up in here. So you just want to be sure you get this oriented correctly. You can actually get it on backwards, but you know, try to get things on correctly. If you do put it on backwards, you won't be able to screw everything together, so it'll be pretty obvious. But again, and I'll go over this in a second, you want to be sure all these surfaces are clean. So I know they were clean because there's no dirt on here, and I just took it apart, so I'm confident that's all clean. But if you're doing this in the field, you want to inspect these before you do each assembly procedure. So we'll slide that plate into place. That's ready to go. We'll put the pistons back on. Now note the pistons are not symmetrical. There's a big step on the bottom that goes towards the crankcase. It actually fits into this opening right here. So we'll put those back on, put all the washers back on. Start the nuts. Okay. Tighten those guys. Okay, now one thing you'll notice here is these washers can move around a little bit, so you just want to center that washer as you're tightening it up. So what I do is tighten these all down until you can feel the nut hit. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll back them off just a little bit so that I can move the washer around. You see how this washer moves? So you just want to center that washer around the nut and then tighten the nut into place. Okay, and again, we'll just center the washer. Center that washer. It's not super critical, but it's just nice to get it close. Okay, so these get tightened. It's about as much as you can do with just your wrist. You don't have to, we're only tightening these to about maybe 15, 20 foot-pounds at the most, so it's not a big torque. Okay, so that's the pistons back on. Now, this is the layer with the valves in them. So again, you want to just make sure that there's no salt crystals or anything. You can see some salt crystals right here, and those will pop off. If you get those in the O-ring, then the O-ring won't seal really well, so you kind of want to wipe those off. But a lot of that, all that will dissolve as soon as you turn the pump on the first time. So one of the things you'll find with these pumps is that sometimes when you put it back together, it'll leak for the first 5 or 10 minutes that you run it, and that's basically because there's probably a salt crystal on one of these O-rings. As soon as that salt crystal dissolves, the O-ring will then fill the space and seal it up. So you also could look at the face of each one of these valves. That's a wear point. You can kind of see where the valve, the face of this valve impacts the seat right here. These actually look really good. You also want to look at the bore in here, run your finger over it. If you can see anything that's gritty or unusual, get that out of there. This one's got a couple little salt crystals in it just because of the way it was taken apart. Scrape those out. Okay, so this is all ready to go back together. That can just slide on. Okay, so now that that's in place, we can take the rubber band off. Again, that just is to keep the valves in place. Same thing with this next plate. We're just looking for making sure there's no debris or anything. That you can see there was a little bit of leakage maybe right here, but nothing critical. A little bit of discoloration is completely normal. You can see on the other side where the valves are hitting. Okay, so with this piece into place, we can put the pistons back on. So the pistons slide on just as they came off. You'll see that they're not symmetrical, so there's a step in the bottom of the piston that goes near the crankcase. Then the washers go on, and the nuts. Okay. Now you may be able to see that I'll zoom in a little bit so it's easier to see. See these washers are a little loose on here. It's by design. So what we're going to do is we'll tighten these nuts down until the nut just contacts the washer. Okay. Okay, and then we'll just back them off a little bit. Okay, and then you can just kind of center the washer as you're tightening the nut down. It doesn't have to be exact, but you just want to get it as close as you can. And again, these don't need to be super tight. I'm just tightening it with my wrist, so it's probably 15 to 20 inch-pounds. Okay, so we're going to install layer 3. This is the layer with the valves in it. There's a balancing port on this side. The piston, there's a spring that goes in against this plate. So put that spring in place. Offer this guy up, slide that into place. And you can take the rubber band off that's holding the valves in place. The next plate that goes on, This goes in this orientation. You can tell because there's the discoloration for the port in the upper right hand corner. So you want to make sure this is nice and clean. You want to make sure the surface on here is nice and clean. There's no salt deposits or anything. I've already cleaned it off, so I know it's clean. This plate slides into place. And then the last little bit is on the valves. We want to be sure that these valves are seated into place. So you can see how this is kind of separated where the valve's not pushed up all the way against the upper surface here. So we'll put this over this bigger hole here, and you can just push this down into place. So I'll show you the difference here. So this is one I just adjusted, and this is the next one over. Sorry. So this valve's been adjusted correctly, and this valve is not. This is normal how they would look as they come out of the unit after it's been run, so that's where the valve is adjusted to, but we want them to all look like that. So that's the difference. So that valve can just snap back into place. We'll take this valve that needed to be adjusted, push it back into place, and see how that's come up like that. So that's the way you want those all to adjust. Go through and adjust all of those. Again, check all the surfaces to make sure they're clean, and then put this back on. Okay, so that's really all there is to it. Now it's just a matter of tightening up all the bolts. You want to do this, excuse me, just like you would on a cylinder head on a car or anything like that. You don't want to tighten any of the screws down until you've got everything kind of snugged into place. So you want to get them sort of finger tight first, and then we'll go around and put all the screws in, and then tighten them in a pattern. So once you get everything so it's kind of finger tight, then you start at the outer edge, go from one corner, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and kind of do that back and forth, and then do the inside one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then go around and do the same thing on the outside. And again, these only need to be, hand tight. So if you've got a T-wrench like this, it's as tight as you can do it with your hand this way. Maybe a little bit tighter like this. But again, you're only talking about maybe 20-25 inch-pounds of force. It's normal for these pumps to leak a little bit around the edges on the bottom when you first start them up. Let it run for an hour or so, that should go away. If it doesn't, then you need to take it back apart and figure out there's a little piece of grit or something on one of the O-ring seals. But that's all there is to it.